When Vladimir Putin ordered the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko was one of the first to stand at his side. He threw his nation into Russia's corner, gambling that the war would be quick, that Ukraine would fall within weeks, and that Belarus would be rewarded as Putin's most loyal ally. In Lukashenko's mind, this was the path to securing his regime and strengthening his country's role in the region. But things did not unfold as he imagined. The war stretched on, not for weeks but for years, dragging Belarus down with it. Instead of being rewarded, Belarus has found itself suffering under sanctions, economic turmoil, food shortages, and the looming threat of losing its sovereignty entirely. The country is unraveling under the weight of a war that was never its own. For decades before this war, Lukashenko had built a reputation as a cunning survivor. He had stayed in power through repression, manipulation, and by playing both sides. On one hand, he remained a loyal partner to Russia, never straying too far from Moscow's orbit. On the other, he dangled promises of reform and democracy to the West, creating just enough hope to keep sanctions at bay and to present Belarus as a neutral middle ground. This balancing act worked for years, allowing him to consolidate power while avoiding total isolation. But neutrality was abandoned the moment Putin marched on Kiev. Lukashenko aligned fully with Moscow, allowing Russian troops to invade Ukraine from Belarusian soil. Reports in the Financial Times revealed that Belarus even played a role in Russia's campaign of abducting Ukrainian children, one of the most horrific aspects of the war. Lukashenko also reversed years of promises by agreeing to host Russian nuclear weapons on Belarusian territory. For him, it was all part of a calculated bet. Ukraine would collapse quickly, Russia would win, and Belarus would prosper as Moscow's closest ally. But Ukraine did not collapse. Instead, it resisted fiercely, and Belarus soon discovered that its fate was tied completely to Russia's. As the war dragged through 2022, Belarus's economy took a heavy hit. Gross domestic product fell by 4.7% as Western sanctions that were aimed at Russia also spread to its closest partner. Russia itself was spiraling into economic hardship, with its GDP contracting for 12 consecutive months, hitting a low of -5.1% in June 2022. The two economies became so intertwined that whatever happened in Moscow echoed directly in Minsk. Yet by 2023, a strange rebound took place. Russia's military campaign demanded weapons, vehicles, and supplies, and Belarus was eager to provide them. Moscow injected cash into the Belarusian economy, keeping its ally afloat. Growth returned, hitting 4% in both 2023 and 2024. Lukashenko boasted that his country was back on track, even though everyone knew this growth was artificial. The recovery came not from innovation or global trade, but from Belarus being reduced to a satellite economy, one that existed to serve Russia's war effort. This recovery carried a hidden cost. To keep the war economy running, Lukashenko transformed Belarus into something resembling a Soviet-style command state. Production was redirected to serve Moscow. Agriculture, energy, and manufacturing were bent to Russia's needs. In reality, Belarus had become a feeder nation, unable to sustain itself without Moscow's money. What was meant to be a mutually beneficial alliance turned into dependency, and dependency slid into exploitation. Putin's demands drained Belarus of resources and stripped away its sovereignty. The signs of decay showed up in unexpected places, including in the most ordinary of foods, potatoes. Potatoes are a staple in Belarus, often called the nation's second bread. In 2025, Politico reported that Belarus faced an unprecedented potato shortage. Years of strict price controls imposed by Lukashenko had made potato farming unprofitable, driving farmers to switch to other crops. As a result, the harvest dropped by more than 900,000 tons in a single year. Prices soared. Inflation hit double digits. For ordinary Belarusians, the cost of living became unbearable. The potato crisis symbolized a deeper collapse. Lukashenko, furious at the shortage, lashed out at his ministers in a now infamous rant, demanding answers as to why his country couldn't even stockpile potatoes properly. But potatoes were just the beginning. Food prices overall were climbing fast. Inflation, which had hovered above 5% since late 2023, reached 7.2% by mid-2025, with food inflation topping 10%. Transportation costs rose as fuel prices spiked, making it harder to move goods around the country. For everyday citizens, life became more expensive and more uncertain. On top of inflation, Belarus also faced a severe labor shortage. By mid-2025, nearly 200,000 jobs were unfilled. Lukashenko floated the idea of bringing in 150,000 Pakistani workers to address the crisis, a desperate plan that underscored just how broken the system had become. Much like Russia, Belarus had turned itself into a wartime economy and was paying the price. The so-called rebound of 2023 and 2024 began to fade. By the first half of 2025, growth slowed to just 2.1%, far below the expected 4.1%. Farming output fell sharply, with potato shortages dragging down agriculture by more than 8%. Exports to Russia, once Belarus's lifeline, dropped by 70%. Having tied its entire future to Moscow, Minsk found itself trapped. Then came another blow, an oil crisis. Ukrainian drones repeatedly struck the Druzhba pipeline, one of the most important arteries carrying Russian oil to Europe, but also the source of crude for Belarus's refineries. With the pipeline offline, Belarus's refineries had no oil to process. Fuel prices jumped 8% in just days. Gasoline shortages spread, and farmers couldn't power their machinery. Long lines formed at gas stations, and panic spread among citizens. In this moment of crisis, many assumed Russia would step in to help its closest ally. After all, Belarus had sacrificed its neutrality, its economy, and its independence to support Putin's war. But instead of helping, Moscow did the opposite. Russian companies began buying up Belarus's limited oil supplies for themselves. Faced with its own shortages, Russia prioritized itself over its ally, leaving Belarus scrambling. To many Belarusians, it felt like a betrayal. This betrayal revealed the true nature of the relationship. Belarus was not a partner but a pawn. Putin saw Belarus as a resource to be used when convenient, not as a sovereign ally. And the noose continued to tighten. On the military front, Belarus was being absorbed step by step. Decades of integration had already tied the Belarusian army to Russia's. As far back as 2000, Moscow had extended its nuclear umbrella to Belarus. By 2025, that integration reached new heights. The Zapad 2025 joint military exercise brought 10,000 Belarusian troops and 4,000 Russian soldiers together on Belarusian soil. But this time, the purpose wasn't to showcase strength against NATO. It was to normalize a permanent Russian presence inside Belarus. Analysts like former British intelligence officer Philip Ingram noted that Belarus was almost partially fallen to Russia already, its sovereignty hollowed out by Moscow's soldiers and missiles. The situation became even clearer when Putin announced the deployment of new hypersonic Orshnik missiles in Belarus. To the Kremlin, Belarus was no longer a separate nation but an extension of Russian territory, a place to host weapons and troops at will. For Lukashenko, the irony was brutal. For years, he had cultivated Moscow's support to secure his own power, even at the cost of weakening Belarus's independence. He believed he could control the balance, that he could use Russia without being consumed by it. But the war proved otherwise. Belarus became so dependent that it could no longer say no. Still, Lukashenko has shown signs of trying to claw back space. In mid-2025, he restricted some refined oil sales to Russia, prioritizing Belarus's domestic market and even exploring more profitable sales to China and India. He also began hinting at releasing political prisoners in an attempt to court the West and secure sanctions relief. Reports surfaced of back-channel talks with American and European officials, suggesting that Lukashenko was once again trying to rebalance between East and West. But these gestures may be too little, too late. Belarus's economy is faltering, its citizens are struggling under inflation and shortages, and Russia has shown it will not hesitate to exploit its ally for its own survival. Military integration is so advanced that Belarus is practically a Russian garrison. Sovereignty exists in name only. What's left is a nation on the edge of implosion. Belarus may soon face the ultimate price of Lukashenko's gamble, not just economic collapse, but the complete loss of independence. For Moscow, that has always been the plan. For Minsk, it is a nightmare of its own making. The only question now is whether Lukashenko can salvage anything before Belarus disappears into Putin's shadow.